want to welcome everybody to the League of Women Voters of Glen, Ellyn community meeting, the Electoral College History and Reform. We are pleased to have with us today League of Women Voters of Illinois, Elizabeth J. Guscott-Mueller, also known as Joy. The purposes of the League of Women Voters are to promote political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not support or oppose any political party or any candidate. After Joy's presentation, we will be asking your questions, and you can send them to us at any time during the presentation. All you need to do is click on the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen to access the window where you can type your question. From there, a VP of Communications, Karen Daly, will present your questions to Joy. Go ahead, Sarah.
I'm happy to go ahead. Now, the League of Women Voters has had a position on the selection of the president since 1970, and it was last revised in 2010. The League of Women Voters of the United States believes that the direct popular vote method is essential for electing the president and vice president and is essential to representative government. The League of Women Voters believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished. We support the use of the National Popular Vote Compact as one acceptable way to achieve the goal of the direct popular vote for election of the president until the abolition of the Electoral College is accomplished. The League also supports uniform voting qualifications and procedures for presidential elections. The League supports changes in the presidential election system, from the candidate selection process to the general election. We support efforts to provide voters with enough information about candidates and their positions, public policy issues, and the selection process itself. The League supports action to ensure that the media, political parties, candidates, and all levels of government achieve these goals and provide that information. Before we get started, I would like to bring to your attention Glen Ellyn's new congressional maps, which have been redrawn as of January 2022. Glen Ellyn is now represented by 3 different congressional districts. Other voting districts affecting Glen Ellyn have also changed, such as for the state legislature. You are invited to visit the League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn website to see these maps and find out if your voting districts have changed. We also kindly ask you to please pass this important information to your friends and family living in Glen Ellyn, as many are not aware of these changes. I would now like to introduce you to Jody Baltimore, the League of Women Voters Glen Ellyn VP of Programs. Jody?
Thanks, Sarah and Michelle. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers tonight. Elizabeth Guscott-Mueller, who does go by Joy, is our presenter this evening. She is a practicing attorney and managing partner of Guscott-Mueller Law. She's a litigator, and her firm practices include environmental, real estate planning matters, and business transactions. She served as the Electoral College Issues Specialist for the League of Women Voters Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee from 2019 until 2021. And she currently serves as an Electoral College Committee member and Electoral College Research Subcommittee member. Joy is also president of the League of Women Voters Lake Michigan region, which is a 4-state, 52-chapter interleague organization with the mission to protect and enhance Lake Michigan and its associated watershed. A member of the League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Change Interest Group Steering Committee, Joy also serves as chair of the League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Change Interest Group Water Subgroup. Past local league board work includes serving as vice president of program and board secretary. As a member of the U.S. District Court, Northern District of Illinois Federal Trial Bar, Joy volunteers on its pro bono panel representing indigent clients in employment discrimination and civil rights litigation. She is also a member of the City of Lake Forest Legal Committee. Past community involvement includes service as a Lake Forest Elementary School Board member, chairman of the Board of Trustees for a large congregation in Lincoln Park, and chairman of the Board of Directors for a Chicago area theater. Joy holds a BA and JD degrees from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and a Master's of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary in Hyde Park. After her presentation, questions will also be supported by Joyce Williams, who is a teammate of Joy's. Joyce is a member of the League of Women Voters of the LaGrange area, where she has served as a director of voter registration and as a board member. Joyce is a founding member of the League of Women Voters Deerfield Electoral College Committee, created during the 2017 Biennial Convention of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. She has given presentations to multiple audiences, including League of Women Voters Illinois and US conventions, about why the Electoral College must be replaced with a direct national vote for president and vice president. Joyce has a 30-year career in advertising and marketing research. She is very comfortable with statistical and census-based analyses. She is grateful to the League for providing her with opportunities to use her professional skills for the benefit of our country. So with those lovely introductions, let's have our presentation with Joy.
Well, thank you, Jody, and thank you, Michelle and Sarah and Karen, for the warm welcome and for inviting us to present today. I also want to thank Joyce Williams for pairing up with me today. She's a vital team member in that she has worked very hard with the team on the PowerPoints, and she's going to be an excellent source of information for our question and answer period. So I'm grateful for her to have joined us. And so I think now we're going to go into the PowerPoint and begin the program. So thank you very much for having us, and welcome to our educational presentation on abolishing the Electoral College by constitutional amendment. We're really excited to share the work that the League of Women Voters has been doing to further this critical issue for our democracy. And we'll be asking for your help at the end of this presentation so that you can help bring this information to your local organizations, your local leagues, your state, and throughout the nation. Most of you are quite familiar with League of Women Voters. For those of you who've just heard my name and may not be familiar with what we do, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League is a natural home for the movement to abolish the Electoral College because the League is about making democracy work better for everyone. The League is specifically and proudly nonpartisan, which means that it can work to improve our democracy without partisan rancor and can help unite people around a common purpose, which I think we can all agree is something that's really necessary at this time in history. It has a national reach and a trusted voice, as well as over 500 local leagues across the nation that are comprised of citizens just like us, working to improve our democracy. The League recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation in democracy. And you've probably seen us in the news having taken stands on issues such as voter information and registration to candidate selection and election procedures. But today we're going to talk about how the Electoral College damages our democracy and how the League is working to abolish it in favor of a direct popular vote for electing the president and the vice president. The League adopted this position, believe it or not, in 1970. So it's been around for 52 years, and it was most recently updated in 2020. So we're first going to talk about where the Electoral College comes from. And Sarah shared the Electoral College position, and I have it up here on the screen for you to read through, and so I won't read it again, but it recommends many changes to our election system that would increase fair and representative participation. And so we are going to go through of Electoral College, clear up some misconceptions about it that you may have heard, and figure out a path forward to finally get this abolished by constitutional amendment. So first, we're going to talk about why the framers of the Constitution actually created an Electoral College. And this is a discussion which could and has taken up several book chapters. But I'm going to try to distill it down to its essential elements as understood by scholars who have tried to answer this question. So the framers' most important consideration was that they wanted to limit the potential for corruption and concentration of power, and to maintain independence between the executive and legislative branches. And therefore, they wanted a method other than having Congress select the president, which was actually the method originally suggested by the delegates. So why not just directly elect the president by the people? Well, one of their concerns was that they worried that large distances and lack of communications would make the people ill-informed about the candidates and unlikely to choose the best person. They worried the people could easily be misguided and misled by a, quote, few designing men, or would simply vote for the candidate from their state. The framers wanted some kind of intermediary system. And it's worth noting that very few of the framers were worried about angry mobs hijacking the election or selection of the president. The worries were more about how a vast population spread over a large country during that time would be able to receive and make an informed choice. There was also some element of the ongoing tension between northern and southern states as well. Slaveholding states did not want direct election because they wanted their enslaved people to count their representation. And one of the compromises was that they were counted as 3/5 of a person in determining the number of electors the states received. So even though they didn't vote, they were counted as that fractional person in order to increase the number of electors that the slaveholding states could receive. So remember that this was also the arithmetic used to determine the numbers in the House of Representatives. So having the electoral system artificially boosted the voting representation of slaveholding states, just as in Congress, whereas a direct popular vote would only count the number of people who could vote, which of course did not include enslaved people. In fact, evidence suggests that there was a lot of discussion and confusion and changing of minds during the process of figuring out the selection system. It was one of the last issues discussed at this exhausting, long, hot and contention convention. And fatigue and impatience may as well played a role in its adoption. While it had broad support, that support was unenthusiastic, and it seemed like the best that they could do at the time. One scholar remarked it was the second choice of many, but the first choice of few, with little idea of how it would play out in reality. One historian has called the Electoral College system a, quote, jerry-rigged improvisation, close quote. So what did the framers intend actually? Well, most intended it for the selection of the president to be based on the popular wishes of the citizenry, with the electoral system as an intermediary system. It was intended to breach the difficulties of distance and communication, as I indicated earlier. James Madison actually considered the elector system to be the next best thing to direct selections, saying that, quote, the president is indirectly derived from the choice of the people, close quote. However, there is some evidence that they also expected the electors to exercise their own discretion in selection of the president, to guard or be a bulwark against corruption, bias, or misinformation. But the electors have almost always acted as a rubber stamp on the votes of the people, with very few exceptions. In those instances where an elector has voted differently than the state's voters dictated, they have been generally met with a great deal of protest and anger, which is to say that the people expect the electors to be a rubber stamp on the will of the people and have never been interested in them exercising their own discretion. Notice that none of the founders' original concerns remain relevant today. Citizens are quite able to become informed about candidates no matter where they live, given technology, transportation that is vastly different than at the time of the framing of the Constitution. The framers' concern about the corruption and concentration of power that would come if Congress elected the president is still valid, but no one is proposing to move to that system. And any notion that we might need electors to exercise their own discretion to overturn a so-called poor decision by the people has just not been borne out over time. The people don't want this, and the electors have rarely done it. So in looking at how the Electoral College came about, it's clear that this is not a foundational text of our Constitution, and that it should not, that this isn't a foundational text that cannot or should not be changed. In actuality, it's an imperfect system that tried to address concerns of the framers at the time. But just as we changed our system of electing senators in 1912 from election by state legislatures to election by popular vote, we can also change our system of electing the president if we think that is necessary to improve our democracy. And there's ample evidence that this system is directly damaging our democracy and does in fact need to be changed. And this is true now more than ever. All you need to do is read the news. So why does the woman vote to abolish the Electoral College? Well, it's a very simple principle. It comes down to the concept of one person, one vote, and is consistent with our positions of democracy and a person's right to vote. The Electoral College weighs some votes more than others, and the number of Electoral College members from each state is based on the number of Congress members from each state, with each state having 2 senators, regardless of that state's population. So for example, one Electoral College member in Wyoming represents fewer than 195,000 people, while one Electoral College member in California represents over 700,000 people. In other words, one vote in Wyoming has over 3.5 times the weight of a single vote in California. The map that you see before you, along with the graphic, shows the weight difference for each state. Voters in states like Wyoming and the Dakotas and Vermont have much more weight in the Electoral College than voters in states like California, Florida, and New York. This is a clear violation of the fundamental principle of one person, one vote. Now, I probably don't have to tell you the names of these states because I think we're all very familiar with them. They are 4 of our well-known swing states, and they are among the 19 states that received all campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008. So 19 states received all of the campaign visits from the 2 presidential candidates in 2008. The other states, 31 of them, received not a single presidential campaign visit. So one question that people ask, well, does modern media make all of this irrelevant? So what? You know, in the age of television and smartphones, we can easily watch the candidates' speeches no matter where they make them, and we can get highlights from any number of sources and news outlets, both online and on television and the papers. And while this is true, the problems with this system go well beyond our ability to hear what the candidates have to say. Part of the League's core mission is to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. As such, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Electoral College system is that it creates a disincentive to vote for citizens living in non-battleground states, which is the majority of people in our country. If you live in Illinois, Mississippi, why should you be going out to vote on a cold and rainy day when you know your state is going to go blue or go red anyway? This graphic really speaks volumes about this problem. The Electoral College decreases participation in our democracy because of one unintended consequence of the Electoral College, the creation of, quote, safe states, close quote, and swing states. The Electoral College gives voters in non-swing states a good reason not to vote. If I'm in a minority safe state, if I'm in the minority in a safe state, my vote will not count. Even if I'm in the majority in a safe state, my vote isn't needed for my candidate to win. So this is a nonpartisan issue affecting both Republican voters in so-called blue states, as well as Democratic voters in so-called red states. And you can see from the graphic that the data from 2016 bears this out. In the graph, you see that the percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for the president was significantly lower in non-swing states compared to swing states. And this is a difference of 7 percentage points, which represents approximately 11 million registered voters in non-swing states who chose not to vote. And this focus on swing states indeed carries over into public policy. For example, a study of trade policy found that industries employing large numbers of voters in swing states were more likely to receive trade-related protection from the federal government compared to industries concentrated in non-swing states. So one can ask what other policy decisions might be influenced by whether the affected states are swing states. Think of climate change, for example. Another can affect college is that it polarizes our electorate, exaggerates our sense of being a divided nation, a nation of red versus blue. Did you know that in Alabama, 35% of voters chose Hillary Clinton? or that 32% of California voters chose Donald Trump. That is a lot of people, not a fringe minority, but a significant portion of the population of these states. And these are two solidly red or solidly blue states. What about Colorado, where 43% of voters went for Trump, or Georgia, where 46% went for Clinton? It doesn't matter. You look at this map that's up on your screen, and all you see is red, blue, right and left, black and white. There are no centrists. There is no complicated middle ground. There is no reason to even talk to people in those other states because they are just too different from me. Their views are too extreme. The Electoral College also distorts the will of the people. So let's look at the Electoral College results from 1984. Most remember this as the most lopsided presidential vote in recent history, with Ronald Reagan winning a full 98% of the Electoral College. This is a remarkable victory. And so we believe everyone voted for Reagan, right? Well, actually, that's wrong. In reality, over 38 million votes were cast for Reagan's opponent in 1984, Walter Mondale. And with 59% of the popular vote was distorted to look like 98%, practically a universal mandate, which was not the case. If we began to see election results like this, we can ask ourselves, might we begin to see ourselves as part of a unified democracy, choosing our leader together, no matter where we live? Might we become more open to diverse opinions among our neighbors and fellow citizens, and more willing to live among people who disagree with us? Imagine instead of seeing ourselves as red or blue, we simply saw ourselves as Americans in a united vote. The results in two recent elections point us, of course, to another serious problem with the Electoral College, which is that it can lead to a presidential winner who did not receive a majority of the votes. Believe it or not, this has happened 5 times in our history, and it's the main reason most people find the Electoral College troubling. You may have heard people say, well, yes, all of this is true, but here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. And so we would like to take you through the common myths and misperceptions of what the Electoral College does and does not accomplish, what it was meant to do, and how it's impacting our democracy. And these myths, they're not just fringe theories, by the way, they're main points that supporters who genuinely believe the Electoral College is appropriate, they use to defend this antiquated system. And none of them really stands up under scrutiny. Electoral College myth number 1. Number 1 argument we hear against abolishing the Electoral College is that a few big states like California and New York will choose our president if we use a direct popular vote election. This is just not true. Let's look at an extreme example, a hypothetical case where each and every state voted for candidate A over candidate B by 60 to 40% margins. How many states would be needed before candidate A clinched the election? Well, 60% of California voters would only be 7% of the total. Texas is the next largest state, but that would get us only to 11% total. So let's keep adding and adding and adding and adding. The next largest state would only get us to 11% total. And when we keep adding, the 6 highest population states would give candidate A less than 25% of the vote. And adding another 6 states still doesn't do it. In fact, candidate A would need to carry the majority, or 27 out of 50 states and the District of Columbia, to win the election. In fact, it's the Electoral College with its winner-take-all system that allows voters from just a handful of states to decide who our president will be. So that was a theoretical answer to the myth that a few large states would be enough to win the popular vote. But now let's look at actual election results. And here you see depicted on the screen the 2012 election results by state for Barack Obama, starting again with the largest states over on the left and adding the vote totals for each state. And you can see from this graphic that the votes from 39 states, 39, were needed to get him to the 63 million votes needed to win the popular vote. That's a large majority of states. It's simply mathematically impossible for an election popular vote determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. The fact is that direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented, regardless of where they live. Voters from swing states would count just the same as voters from non-swing states. Voters from the city would count just the same as voters from the country. A California Republican's vote would count just the same as a California Democrat's vote. Let's look specifically at California, where the presidential vote is split just as it is in all states. 32% of California voters voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Once the state's votes were totaled, all 4.5 million of those were erased. Why should only a portion of a state's votes count in choosing the president of all the people? In a national popular vote system, those votes would be added to the national total along with votes from all other states, regardless of who got the most in each state, and regardless of whether the state is big or small. The fact is that we no longer would be voting by state, but by person. So a California voter would get no more say in our presidential election than a voter from Mississippi, Rhode Island, Kansas, or any other state. This is what the framers intended when they unanimously agreed with James Madison's statement that the president is to act for the people and not for the states. Myth number 2, smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented by the president. The fact is that there is no coherent small state or large state interest that needs protecting by the Electoral College. Even the smallest state has substantial diversity within it, and it is a fallacy to suggest that when a person goes red or blue, or pardon me, when a state goes red or blue, that this represents the interests of the entire state. The concerns of a farmer are likely to be very different from those of a computer programmer, whether they live in New Hampshire, Nebraska, or any other small state. Small states represent a great diversity of economic interests, and they share many of these interests with large states. For example, our agriculture. Most farmers live in states with large populations, such as Texas, Florida, California, and other economic interests with farmers from smaller states all over the country. The great political battles of American history have been fought between opposing ideologies or economic interests, not between large states and small states. There is no coherent small state interest that needs protection by the Electoral College. The representatives of small states do not vote as a bloc in Congress, and their citizens do not vote as a bloc for president. Electoral College myth 2. The precedents of the numbers from the 2016 election show this emphatically. The smallest 1/3 of states, those with fewer than 6 electoral votes, did not all go for the same candidate. In fact, they were exactly evenly split, with 8 going for Clinton and 8 going for Trump. Small states do not vote as a bloc, and they do not benefit from the Electoral College. And this graphic demonstrates that dramatically, in my opinion. In fact, smaller states are routinely ignored by presidential candidates under the current system, both as candidates and as presidents. As I mentioned earlier, swing states are the ones that receive the vast majority of attention from candidates, and swing state interests are more heavily reflected in our laws and policies than are the interests of small states, large states, red states, or blue states, especially in election years. So there is no basis for the myth that smaller, less populated states need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure that their interests are represented by the president. Electoral College myth number 3. Presidential candidates do not focus on small or large population states. In reality, they focus on so-called swing states, like these from 2016. These are the states where 95% of the campaign events and 99% of the spending were spent in the fall of 2016. These are the states who influence a candidate's positions. The Electoral College forces candidates to focus on swing states rather than all states. And the interests of smaller population states is actually protected by the Senate, where each state gets equal representation regardless of their population. Fact, the Electoral College actually diminishes the rightful representation of the residents of larger states. For example, Virginia's population is almost 9 times larger than Delaware's, but it only gets 4 times as many electors because electors are based on the number of senators and representatives from each state. Is that fair? The Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Protecting minority rights is a critical part of democratic societies, and the Founding Fathers designed our government accordingly. As a result, 2 of our 3 branches of government are designed to ensure the protection of minority rights. The first is the courts. Their role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of the majority of citizens. The second is the Senate, in which every state regardless of population size, gets 2 representatives. This ensures that Wyoming gets heard just as loudly as New York, even though more people live in New York. The fact is that we do not protect a minority by giving them outsized political power. We protect the rights of minority groups and individuals through our Constitution's Bill of Rights, our courts, and our laws. Our votes should all count equally. Remember, the president is supposed to represent the interest of all Americans as fairly and equally as possible. And that means one person, one vote. Abolishing the Electoral College will mostly benefit Democratic candidates. This is myth number 4. There is a modern analysis that shows in 1960, Republican Richard Nixon actually won the popular vote by about 48,000 votes over Democrat John Kerry. The next myth is that abolishing the Electoral College is a partisan issue benefiting only Democratic candidates. And it's true that in recent elections, the Electoral College chose a Republican candidate over a Democratic candidate who won the popular vote. But let's look at another example, the 2004 election, where Republican George Bush defeated the Democratic candidate John Kerry in both the Electoral College and in the popular vote with a 3 million vote margin. But here's what would have happened if John Kerry had received just a few more votes in just one state. Can you see it in this graphic? Look at Ohio. If Kerry had won only 119,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College and thus the election. George Bush would have still had nearly 3 million more popular votes, but he would have lost the election. That's how close it came to the Republican candidate winning the popular vote, but losing the Electoral College. Simply put, this is a nonpartisan issue. And on a more personal level, what about the Republican voter in so-called blue Vermont or the Democratic voter in so-called red Kansas? Neither of these voters feels that their vote for president counts. So this is a disincentive for them to vote, and this is really bad for democracy. The fact is that the Electoral College can hurt both parties. Again, this is a nonpartisan issue. So how do we go about abolishing the Electoral College? Well, we amend the Constitution. The League of Women Voters supports a constitutional amendment that would replace the Electoral College with direct election of the president. In theory, it's quite simple. Congress passes an amendment by 2/3 majority in both houses, and then 3/4 of the states, that's 38 states, ratify it. Now, getting a constitutional amendment will take some time. And it's not going to happen this year. But the League of Women Voters is currently focusing on what we're doing today, which is starting discussions about where the Electoral College comes from and how it's bad for our democracy. And perhaps more importantly, we do want people to understand that passing a constitutional amendment is possible, and it has and can happen. In many ways, the most pernicious myth about the Electoral College is the defeatist feeling that a constitutional amendment is just never going to happen. Opponents of a direct popular vote claim this. Well, constitutional amendments do happen. Counting the Bill of Rights as one, our Constitution has been amended 18 times. As this timeline shows on the screen, amendments are most likely to occur during times of crisis or confidence, like the Bill of Rights when our nation was being formed, or after the Civil War, or during the Progressive Movement, or in the early part of the 20th century, or the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s and 70s. We believe we are living in one of these times right now. So the time is right and ripe for a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. Abolishing the Electoral College is a key part of our national conversation these days. It's been in the headlines and on talk shows all over traditional and social media. The majority of the country has consistently supported amending the Constitution to abolish the Electoral College since 1970. Since 1960. The time for action now. They're inviting you to be part of this national movement. Because of the long time frame expected for an amendment to pass and be ratified, the League also supports, as an interim measure that would effectively nullify the Electoral College and result in the election of the president by popular vote, while we continue working on a long-term constitutional amendment. This measure is called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and it would guarantee the presidency to the candidate who receives the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia combined. It pledges the state's electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, and it would not take effect until enacted by states possessing a majority of the electoral votes, 270 votes. What about proportional representation? And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but one reform which the League specifically rejects and does not support is the voting by electors based on proportional representation in lieu of a winner-takes-all method. The Constitution says that states are free to assign their electors however they see fit, and winner-take-all is not the only option. Currently, Maine and Nebraska assign their electors proportionate to each candidate's vote percentage in the state. So for example, if 40% of Nebraska voters chose candidate A, that candidate would get 2 of Nebraska's 5 electoral votes. The problem with the proportional system and why we don't support it moved is that were adopted by every state, it's fairly likely that no candidate would receive the 270 electoral vote majority to win. This, according to the Constitution, would send the election of the president to the House of Representatives, where each state, regardless of population, would receive only 1 vote. This would further remove the election of the president from the will of the people, and would be in direct contrast to the intent of the framers of the Constitution. You're probably scratching your head trying to figure out why this system would make it unlikely that a candidate would receive 270 votes, electoral votes. The reason is that we always have more than just 2 parties running for president. There are third parties, fourth parties, and beyond. In the 2016 election, votes were actually cast for 31 different candidates, plus a none of the above in some states. So let's run through a very quick example with the 1968 election, a closely fought contest between Richard Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, and George Wallace, an unusually strong third-party candidate. Here you can see that Nixon won the popular vote by a thin margin, but easily received the required 270 electoral college votes under the winner-takes-all system. What if electoral votes were allocated on the percentage of popular vote by state? In Kansas, Nixon would have received 4 electoral votes instead of all 7. In Illinois, Nixon would have received 12 instead of 26. In Florida, 6 instead of 14. And as you can see, Wallace and Humphrey are picking off votes bit by bit in each state. when you do this for all 50 states, the results, when you do this for all 50 states, the results of the proportional allocation is that there is no winner in the Electoral College. Nixon fails to achieve the required 270 votes, so the election of the president would have been turned over to the House of Representatives with 1 vote per state and none for DC. Again, the simplest, most permanent solution is to elect the president by direct vote of all citizens of the United States. 1 person, 1 vote. Abolishing the Electoral College would be a consensus data system that most Americans agree is utterly out of date, confusing, and downright ridiculous. It's time to start building the momentum that will once and for all abolish the Electoral College, a dysfunctional system, and elect our president by popular vote. Remember from the graphic in our previous comments, this may seem like a daunting task, but constitutional amendments do happen. Remember, we've amended the Constitution to change the way we elect senators, to impose term limits on the presidency. We've also passed amendments to include Washington, D.C. in the election of the president, an amendment to eliminate the poll tax, an amendment to change the voting age to 18. All amendments affect the way we elect our representatives in Washington, and all of these that I just recited have been passed by constitutional amendment. So there is no reason why we cannot abolish the Electoral College if we decide to do it. And so I encourage you to join us and help us get to work on getting the Electoral College abolished by constitutional amendment. What can you do? There are 3 simple actions you can take today to grow this movement to abolish the Electoral College. First, please put your name and email in the chat, and I'm going to ask your co-presidents if they can share that with us so that you can receive regular email updates about our progress. And believe me, we won't spam you. We're very circumspect in what we send out, and we really don't have time to send out more than, say, 1 email a month. Second, do follow us on Facebook and share our educational posts on your Facebook page. You can find us at Electoral College, Abolish Electoral College at LWV. And for those of you who don't do Facebook, we will be on Twitter soon too. And finally, here's the most effective thing you can do today to help abolish the Electoral College. Schedule another presentation like this one if you know, if you're part of an organization that has not had one yet. We have multiple options. You can arrange for another presentation just like this one, and we'll come out and do the presentation for you. Or you can even do it yourself and we'll give you everything you need. We have a 20-minute presentation version or a longer 40-minute option, which is the one that you heard today. And we will help you if you decide you want to do it yourself. We can help you do that, and we can help you give this, or we will give it to civic and political organizations, high schools, college classes, work groups, faith-based groups. And I know Joyce always says at the end of her presentation that heck, she'll even talk to your family reunion if you're so inclined. So the bottom line is we want to reach as many people as possible. So thank you for your kind attention today. We're so grateful for the opportunity to share this with you. And now we are going to open it up for questions and answers. And I believe that Karen, your VP of Communications, is going to moderate the questions, and we welcome them. And I'm going to invite Joyce Williams to unmute herself and come on camera. And I will stop the share and we can chat.
Thank you so much, Joy. While Joyce joins in, there she is, she's here, and Karen's here too. I do see some questions are starting to come into the Q&A. If you are an attendee and you have any question, please type it in the Q&A and we will organize them, and Karen will be asking them to our presenters. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen, our VP of Communications.
Right. Hi, everybody, and welcome. And I'm so glad that we decided to have this via Zoom. My commute took 3 times as long as normal today, and we have a great turnout tonight. So I'm really happy that there's so many people interested in this topic. Please, Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. Please go ahead and ask a question there if there's some more information. Even though Joy's presentation was very comprehensive. And we also welcome Joyce Williams here to help us answer questions. One question that I think is interesting that came up was who currently has the biggest stake in keeping the Electoral College as is? Who benefits most from it is the question.
Joyce, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll take that one. I'd say 2 groups, and you know, I haven't thought about this a lot, frankly, but there could be more, but off the top of my head, there are 2 groups. And the first group, I will say, is both the Republican and the Democratic Party. And both parties benefit from that. And the reason is that the Electoral College essentially keeps third parties out of our political system. The Electoral College was designed that it requires a majority. It's not good enough for you to get 49% and then 10 other groups all get, 5%. You still will not win in the Electoral College. You have to have over 50%. And ties, once again, numerically, it's an even number. Numerically, it is possible for a tie. And then it goes into, as Joy was saying, it goes into Congress where one person, one state, one vote. So that the first thing I would say is that it gave us a 2-party system. Some people love that, some people hate that, but that's what it does. And it keeps those in power. The other thing the other people that benefit are swing states. Swing states, they bring in money, they get attention, they get outsized voices in terms of issues that matter to them. It is amazing to trace back some of the things that swing states get. Simply because they are swing states. And if you were in a non-swing state, you would not get those benefits. So those are the 2 groups I would say that are the biggest. A lot of people will tell you that, as Joy said, people think, well, the Electoral College, favors Republicans and it hurts Democrats, and that's why the Democrats don't like it. And like I said, it actually, right now, the last 2 times that the Electoral College chose somebody that the people did not choose, they happen to be Republicans. It could go differently in future elections. So it's both big parties.
So both basically keeping a third party out. Wouldn't that change the dynamic though for a popular vote also with regard to, well, you already said where presidential candidates campaign, as well as where money is spent, right? So that's a big driver as well.
Right, and that's why I was saying for swing states, I mean, it's an economic boon for them. Think about when, there are big events, people fly in, people get hotel rooms, people need food, people go out for drinks. I mean, it brings a lot of money in to swing states. Sure. So it's swing states and the 2 large parties who benefit from the most, I think, in terms of the Electoral College.
That's clear. We had a couple of questions that some people would want sort of re-explanation of slide 27 and 28 about the myth of the large states not driving the election if we were to go to a purely vote. So
yeah, I think those charts are I think those charts are my fault. Joy, if you're able to reshare again.
Sure, let's-
And you said it was like slide 27,
The question was about 27 and 28.
27 and 28.
And I have, it's, Joyce, this is the slide that addresses, we go through a series of clicks and it shows that you would need, it wouldn't just be a few states that would determine the election. So let me go back.
Yeah, so if you can go back and put that up, because I think it'll be easier for people to understand that when they can see it. And like I said, I'm the one who pulled the data and created the charts because I'm just that kind of geek. So I love that stuff. Anyway.
While she's looking for it, I'm curious if who would have won in that Nixon if it had gone to the House of Representatives, Who would have won?
I haven't looked into that. I would have to double check what their congressional group looked like. Yeah,
I want to Google that afterwards because that's
I
very
know. I'm like, I'm curious now too.
Question. Okay, here's slide 27.
Okay. So if you look at slide 27, one of the things that we did here is we said, okay, let's do what we would call a landslide, which is a 60-40 vote. Candidate A gets 60% of the vote in every state. And that is like a huge victory. No one's probably ever done that in history. And if you do that, what you would see is that, again, based just on popular vote, that California would contribute 7% of the vote for that candidate. And we would just go by, we do all the biggest states first. So Texas is the next biggest state, Florida, New York. So you can see, even though we talk about California and how big it is, our population is actually pretty spread out. If you compare us to places like Australia or Canada, their populations are much more concentrated than the United States. We've actually spread out across this continent fairly well. So you can see it's not until you get all the big states from California all the way down to Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia, and then we couldn't list them all, the next 15 highest states. So before you would actually get a majority of the popular vote. So there is, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so you would need 27 out of the 50 states.
It's actually more than that. The 27 states in DC are the ones that you wouldn't need because they're the smallest ones. So it's whatever, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 29 states. Sorry, you would need 29 states, and DC counts as a state as well, if I added that up right. So basically, you would need more than half the states to win the Electoral College. And in reality, a 60-40 going the exact same way in every state would never happen. So even this is a pretty extreme example. So yes, you could win California, Texas, you could win many big states, but it wouldn't be enough. Because as you saw, Joy showed, I think, a couple of times, the big state like California has many different types of voters. And so in any election, Republicans do get, my sister lives in Orange County, believe me, I know there are a lot of Republicans down there. And so, there are a lot of Democrats in San Francisco, and there are a lot of Republicans in Orange County. And so there's diversity within each of our states.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then if you go to the next slide, is one of my favorites, actually.
Oh, hold on.
Sure. Because this is the one that shows a real election. So it's from 2012. And so what you can see is that we organized the states from kind of like biggest to smallest and looked at the popular vote by state. So here you see a more realistic viewpoint. So first we did an extreme example. Now we looked at a real election in 2012, and we saw we couldn't put all the numbers in, but we could see that, out of the total votes, it would have taken about a little over 63 million votes to win the popular vote. And before you would get to 63 million votes, you would need the popular votes from 39 states.
And this is cumulative. I think that was part of
It
the
is
confusion.
cumulative, so that's right,
Cumulative.
exactly. So California has like that little bar in the beginning, even though it's the biggest state, it has a little bar. And then the next one is we added New York's vote to California's vote. And then the next one, we added Texas to California and New York. So it's cumulative. Thank you, Karen, for pointing that out. So you go all the way to the end where you're getting into the Dakotas and Alaska and stuff before, to add on sort of the gravy vote. But if that had been a popular vote election, then 2012, that was Obama, would have needed all of those votes before he could have won. So again, you need votes from the vast majority of states under a popular vote system in order to win. Because again, our country is much more diverse. We all live next door to people who have different political viewpoints than we do. It's fine.
And I think actually the pandemic has created even and more so, because a lot of California people in San Francisco are moving to Idaho, and so I think that there's more of a mix that's happening in every state. And in fact, this also argues that Wyoming, the 3 little electoral votes, that they would have not as much power in a popular vote, but they'd have never been as much power to go over to take somebody over the top or not in this particular scenario.
Well, I think what's real important in this too is, I mean, the bottom line when looking at these slides is so many times you hear people say, oh, well, California, New York, they would decide the election and the big cities would decide the election. And when you look at these slides and the data, you just realize it's not possible. It's not possible.
So I have had a question about whether you're comfortable sharing at least these slides or a portion of these slides for people to be able to use to counter maybe a relative at over.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Is our presentation available for download? I can't remember any place.
Well, it has been.
But it is. It's housed somewhere.
It has been on the Illinois site, but they have redone the site, and I don't think it's up yet. But I
think we were going to put it on the Deerfield site.
But if you would
like, happy to put it on the Glen Ellyn site to have people download it there if you'd like to. Do you know if there are plans to update it with the 2020 election data? I know it's a lot of work.
Joyce?
Yeah, we are. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to give a shout out to Joyce and the rest of our team and she's spearheading it. We are doing another presentation. We will be doing a presentation at the issues briefing. And so we will have quite a bit of reference to the 2020 election and updated information. So sign up for the state issues briefing and you can watch
for sure
a different version of this. It'll be the newest and latest.
And then a quick shout out for that's for those of you who haven't heard of it. It's a really wonderful thing that the Illinois League does that provides a real deep dive on important issues that we all care about. And it's extremely enlightening. So have a look at that at the Illinois League of Women Voters Illinois site, the issues briefing.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
And just a brief shout out for that. What we're working on there is exciting for a couple of reasons. One is we're asking one of our good friends from a group called the National Vote. And he is going to be presenting slides that talk about the vulnerabilities of the Electoral College that were revealed on January 6th. So there are things that we didn't even, it wasn't even in our mind that these things could happen to the extent that they did. And he'll be talking about the different areas of the Electoral College that make us vulnerable to malicious actors. And the other part of it that I'm working on, and I'm still, trying to get in, and again, we allude to it slightly, but to talk about the racist history of the Electoral College. I actually went back and got a chance to read through a lot of stuff about the Constitutional Convention in 1787, when the Electoral College was created, and it's mind-blowing. Some of it.
I mean, it's interesting that Virginia, which was the biggest population, had the biggest population of slaves, elected our first, I think, 7 or 8 presidents because of that they had so many more electoral votes. It is fascinating, and I would listen to that. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the biggest argument here, I think, really is about, for the League, is about voter suppression, because there's no benefit for a state, for example, to even encourage voting, because they're only going to get however many votes they get. So it doesn't matter how many people come out to vote. In fact, it could encourage voter suppression.
Right.
Correct?
Yes, and I think the other, when we talk about who benefits, it's anybody who doesn't want people to vote. I do think the Electoral College has given us the two-party system. It has also given us low voter turnout, because so many people just have gotten frustrated and just say, well, it doesn't make any difference what I say. And I think if every vote counted and every vote counted equally, that I would like to believe that people would be more vested and feel better about going out and voting on election day. So,
absolutely. We have a question about ranked choice voting. So, and the question is, would abolishing the Electoral College work if we were to use ranked choice voting?
Yes, but it would have to be thought through. So yes, we could. Ranked choice voting, how the vote is done, is almost in some ways a separate issue from what the system is. So you could have ranked choice voting and the Electoral College. The way most, as you know, the way most states do it is these days, because again, it's all about power, and they realized they had more power if they, had a winner takes all of the electoral votes. And so it wouldn't change much. Under the current system, some states could do ranked choice and other states could not. And it would all sort of get lumped together in the Electoral College. Under a popular vote system, again, you could have ranked choice voting. So I think that is a separate issue and an intriguing one, separate from the Electoral College. What it would help with is if, for example, in a popular vote system, if you still wanted to get people to see that they had a majority of the votes, that could, the way you count up on ranked choice voting, that could help. So,
do any other countries have a system? It's such a weird system. Does anybody else have this?
No.
As a democracy? Nobody. Not even close.
We have not been able to find anybody, even the tiniest little island country, wherever the tiny countries are. No, nobody else uses a system like this, and which is pretty remarkable given that so many aspects of our democracy have been copied by other countries. That's one that nobody wanted to touch.
Well, it's it has become increasingly a partisan, which is funny given the history and the outcome. Do you see that changing at all? Is there any motivation?
That's such a big question about is the partisan and fighting within our nation going to die down? So it depends on the day you ask me how I would answer it, if I'm feeling cynical or optimistic that day.
But even just about this topic, which seems to be.
Yes. Well, again, what's fascinating is there used to be huge Republican support. Richard Nixon, after his, close call, and it was a close call. People were scared back in 1968, I think it was, that, George Wallace was really going to mess things up and could potentially steal the election, be a spoiler for Richard Nixon. And so Republicans then, 1970, we came really close to abolishing the Electoral College. And guess what happened?
Led by Republicans.
Republicans and Democrats both. Hubert Humphrey was scared too. So the parties were kind of together almost. What's interesting is how it got stopped, and it got stopped by Southern Democrats. They are the ones who went in there and threatened filibuster and all kinds of things. So it sort of died down or died away because of that. So. So yes, I do think at some point, I don't think in the near term, frankly, the Republican establishment, quite frankly, would embrace this because they've bought the idea that this is benefiting them. So
Well,
hopefully
but-
there'll be some examples soon that will demonstrate that it does not necessarily benefit them all the time.
And
I-
public opinion is for abolishing.
Public opinion has consistently been for abolishing in huge majorities. As you know, there are many, many people out there who have no idea that this electoral college exists. They don't quite get it. But among those who do, yes, they want it gone. If you explain to them, it's one of those things, coming from a marketing research background, a lot of it depends on how you word the question. But it has consistently shown over time. What really happened, though, as you said, is in recent years, since the Clinton-Trump election, Republican, everyday Republican-leaning people have gotten more firmly opposed to firmly opposed to a popular vote. So it has become more of a partisan issue than it used to be in recent, and that happened recently. So I'm hoping that will fade away as well.
Joyce, I'm just going to take a minute, though, to disagree respectly.
Oh, sure. We argue all the we argue.
Like a good debate.
all the
Like a
time.
good debate.
Because
Go for
I
it.
think the majority support for abolishing the Electoral College runs contrary to the idea that it lacks nonpartisan. That there is bipartisan support for it. I think there is bipartisan support for it. Not all Republicans,
Oh,
not
yeah.
all Democrats, but if you have a majority of the country supporting it, that means people from both sides of the aisle support abolishment of the Electoral College. And look, it's a DEI issue. It's a vestige of slavery. January 6th would not have happened but for the existence of the Electoral College.
Yes.
It's an antiquated system. It's got to go. And I think I know many, many Republicans who support abolishment of the Electoral College. So
Yes.
I understand what you're saying, and I think we are in partisan times, but this is one of the reasons we love this issue, because we truly believe it is in the spirit of the league, that it's an issue that you can say, yes, this has nonpartisan implications and we need to all support it.
Well, and
You're absolutely right. I spoke in like extreme terms. You're absolutely right. There are many Republicans out there who would like to see the Electoral College go.
And several of the questions that have come up now are about that, in terms of the motivation of current sitting office holders have, in terms of either advocating for change or advocating to keep it. What motivation do they have to make that change is the first part of the question. The second is then where can we take it from there? If there's not sort of a general consensus that we need to move to that, where do we go?
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of current office holders, again, I must be having a cynical night, but a lot of them would come down to whether they think it's going to benefit them or not. But what it really comes down to is I do believe that for most office holders, it comes down to, what do my constituents want? And if they see a strong movement among their constituents, they will want to get on board. And that's why I do think that the approach that the league is taking now, that we on the committee are taking now, which is about doing meetings like this, talking to people individually, get them thinking about it, give them the information so that they know, oh no, that's a myth. That's not really true. California and New York or LA and New York City are nowhere near big enough to determine who the president is going to be. Those kinds of things, I think we need to get that message out there. So I think sort of a grassroots movement is required to get this going again.
And are there other large groups that are advocating for this, or the League of Women Voters sort of leading the effort, or is there a leader of an effort to try to get Constitution changed?
I don't think I don't believe that there's a leader in the effort right now. And I think the League could be that leader and probably should be that leader, because it aligns so strongly with the values of the League in terms of one person, one vote, getting people involved and removing barriers to people voting. And the Electoral College is a barrier to people voting. So I do think it would be great if the League did. There are certainly other groups out there, but a coalition hasn't been formed. And, that's probably what it would take.
Right.
So there are many, many individuals and there are many groups who would say, yeah, but they are not prioritizing it. So they agree with it, but they're not putting their time, effort behind it. So that's what we need to do is get some momentum going for it, and get more and more people to care about it and to stop this defeatist attitude of constitutional amendments. They never happen. It ain't easy. It shouldn't be easy,
Right.
but it has happened, and it will be more.
Well, and I will say this, first of all, in terms of the League, this was added as a program item on the floor of convention at the LWVUS convention in 2020. And that, you need a lot of votes to do that. And the majority of the delegates there voted to make this a program item. We are proposing this as a program item again in 2022. And we have our committee sent out a request to have you request that it be added up as a program item in your program planning materials. So if you haven't sent them in yet, we would encourage anyone from local leagues to do so. But we do, Representative Cohen from Tennessee every year puts out a proposal to abolish the Electoral College by constitutional amendment. And then Senator Durbin doesn't have one pending right now because I think he's focused on, restoring voting rights after it was decimated by the Supreme Court in 2015. But he perennially proposes a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College, Senator Durbin from Illinois. So it's out there. There are office holders who, in answer to the question, there are office holders who want to see it abolished. They just need to hear from their constituents. When you see it go up, they need to hear from constituents.
Currently, the worry is there's not enough bipartisan support to move it forward without breaking the filibuster, or that's the worry now.
I guess so, but the thing is, we're in it for the long term. I mean, it's a long game.
It's been 50 years that we've advocated, right? So it is a long game.
Amendment. I mean, we've really got to, you have to start somewhere, and
that's right.
Things can change on a dime depending on current events. And
I'm excited by the fact that we had a lot of people on this webinar. And I think the last question I'll ask here then is, what can we do? What are the folks who are on this webinar, are the ones who are going to watch it on YouTube? What can we do? Who can we call? What's our next step?
Well, I would say, as Joy was just saying, if you're a member of the League of Women Voters, make sure, assuming you agree with us, because Joy was so convincing, who wouldn't agree with her, that, to please fill out your program planning form for LWV for the US League, and let them know that, and we have recommended language. If you're worrying about, like, how do I word that, we'll share that with you. That's what my league just did. And, put that in as something that you would like to add to the program to abolish the Electoral College by constitutional amendment, so we can continue to have that as a program item for the next 2 years. The second thing is, as Joy was saying, is that, we could easily go out there and say, hey, contact your representatives now. But I think it's more important to talk to other people. I think getting this grassroots thing going. And Joy is not exaggerating. I will talk to family reunions, birthday parties. I'll talk to anybody. And especially these days with Zoom, I could do it anywhere. So we really need to get people, because all they hear about it are these little snippets, these little headlines, little Facebook memes, and they don't get the full story. And it's not an easy story. It's a crazy, complicated system that came up, that was created for crazy, complicated reasons that are understandable looking at the past, whether you agree with them or not. So I think it's more important to continue this educational program, and just think about any group that you have that, you know, people would be, you know, interested to learn more about the Electoral College and the harm that it's doing to our country.
We will certainly have this Zoom available on our YouTube channel and our website, LWVGE.org. We'd love to have the presentation if people want to download it and examine it themselves and send it to a friend. So there'll be ample opportunities for everyone on this call to get the message out.
Great.
I think we're going to close down now. Sarah and Michelle and Jody, want to pop back on?
Thank you.
You guys have been great. This has been very educational, very, very interesting.
Thank you for inviting us. It was a
Thank
delight
you.
to be with you today. Thank you all.
Well, thank everyone for coming tonight to the presentation of the Electoral College History and Reform. I'd like to make a big shout out to our two presenters, to both Joy and to Joyce, for their excellent slide presentation and education for us on this really critical topic that I feel I learned a lot. And I'm sure there are other people in the audience that learned a great deal as well. I also want to thank our participants for being engaged and asking probing questions, because that's how we all move forward in learning about something that we might want to change. Before we change, we kind of have to have a better understanding. So I really appreciate this program, and Joy and Joyce, thanks again. Our next community meeting is going to be on Thursday, March 17th, and it kind of flows into the same sort of issues that we have great concern for as the League. We're going to be learning and discussing the history and now of voter suppression. And obviously, with all the states and what's been going on with restriction of voting laws, with, as Joyce mentioned, you know, the failure of the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, this is a particularly timely topic. So we hope you're interested. Please go on to our website and you will be able to sign up for that webinar as well. So once again, thanks for coming, and have a very pleasant rest of your evening. Good night.
You too. Good night.
Right, thank you.